Welcome to Backstage with Richard Ridge. The Screen Actors Guild Foundation and BroadwayWorld have partnered for a filmed conversation Q&A series celebrating the vibrant theater community here in New York City and the union actors who aspire to have a career on both stage and screen. This special event, which is coming from the New School, is a conversation with one of Broadway's favorite leading ladies, whose career has encompassed stage, screen, television, and concerts around the world. Please welcome Tony Award winner, Miss Betty Buckley. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Thanks.
I love your new album, Ghostlight.
Thank you.
Which reunites you with T-Bone Burnett. How did this album come about?
Well, T-Bone and I grew up together in Fort Worth, Texas, and his mother, Hazel Vernon, was a friend of my mother's, Betty Bob. And so the two of them, I knew T-Bone around, all the musicians in town were kind of aware of each other, and I was a girl singer that was singing with a little jazz combo at the Casa del Sol Jazz Club, and we had a very close mutual friend, a young man I went to high school with named Stephen Bruton. And Stephen's father, Sumter, owned Record Town in Fort Worth. And that's where we all went to get our vinyl recordings. And, you know, we were all aware of all kinds of music. And I think those early days in Fort Worth was when we became fans of world music and not categorizable music. Anyway, Hazel and Betty Bob decided that Joseph Henry and I should get together and make an archive recording, because T-Bone owned his own recording studio from the time he was 17, which is pretty remarkable if you think about it, you know. And so one Saturday afternoon, I went in and recorded a handful of songs that I'd been singing with this jazz ensemble, or this jazz trio. And it was an archive tape on a reel-to-reel tape. There were 2 copies. And I sent one copy to my first agent, who signed me when I was a junior at TCU, Texas Christian University. I'd been a guest entertainer at the Miss America pageant, representing all the losers in America who never make it to Atlantic City. And so that's a long story. But anyway, because I was on television singing and dancing, they called me from this agency in New York, which was then called Ashley Famous Agency, and then became International Famous Agency, and is now ICM. And they asked me to fly into New York right after the Miss America pageant and sing for these agents, and I did, and they signed me. And then they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to go back and finish college, because my father was very opposed to my being in show business. And so I went back to school, and in the meantime, we'd made this recording. And so I sent a copy to my first agent, Roger Hess, who went on to become a great Broadway producer. And he kept it for a gajillion years and played it for the publisher of Playbill, a man named Phil Bursch, who was starting his own record label several years ago. And he called me and said, we want to release this archive recording, which I hadn't heard for years and years and years, you know, as the first album you never had. And so they released it and called it Betty Buckley 1967. It was released by Playbill and Sony BMG. And then we sent a copy. It was released on vinyl and CD. We sent a copy to T-Bone. And he and I had stayed in touch all these years as friends. Whenever he would come to New York, we'd hang out, have dinner, go see a play or whatever. And he would always casually say, well, we need to make another record. And I would say, yeah, we need to make another record. But, you know, I didn't think too much about that, because he was pretty busy with Elton John and the Rolling Stones and Robert Plant and people like that. So I was like, yeah, that's pretty far-fetched, you know. So, but it was always nice of him to say that. And then we sent him this recording, and he, you know, was so moved to recall our youth and what we'd done when we were both 19. And then he kind of started talking seriously about it. And then a couple of years ago, he called out of the blue in June and said, my schedule is cleared for the summer. We need to make that album. I want you to come to LA and let's really make this record. And I was really excited. You know, I was like, oh my God. So I flew to LA and we sat down and started working on the record. And he had a bunch of great ideas and directed it very cinematically. And the way he saw it was so fascinating. And I tell you, the recording sessions for Ghostlight where I felt like I had moved into another realm. I mean, T-Bone is so brilliant, and his mind is just so big, you know, and he's just has such a vast intelligence. I always get rather dizzy when I'm around him. I'm always like, whoa, it's like, it's hard to keep up with him, but he's such a wonderful, generous, loving man, and certainly this record was one of the greatest gifts anyone has ever given me. And every night when I come home from the recording sessions, I just felt like I was in heaven, in some heavenly realm, because he surrounded me with musicians that are just so brilliant, like Bill Frisell, the world-class guitar player, and these other brilliant musicians on the record. And we recorded at the Village Recording Studios, which is a very famous recording studio in Los Angeles. And the actual room we recorded in was built for Fleetwood Mac, and the vocal booth was built for Stevie Nicks. And so I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Because I was a hippie kid when I was growing up. I really was a child of the 60s and, went to school in the late 60s and always wanted to be a part of that music scene. And while we were making the record, T-Bone said, people don't know this about you, Betty Lynn, but all you ever really wanted to be is the singer with the band, And I begged my family to let me go to Berkeley, when I went to college, because, Janis Joplin had grown up in Beaumont, Texas, and I thought, I can sing like that. I need to go to San Francisco. And my dad was like, over my dead body, you will go to Texas Christian University and you will like it, And my mother was like, here, listen to this recording of Julie Andrews. And I was like, Mom. So anyway, it's a huge gift, and I'm really, really thrilled that the album is out in the world, and I, love T-Bone Burnett beyond loving.
You have released an astounding 16 solo albums.
Thank you.
You are as mesmerizing on a recording as you are in live performance. What gives you the greatest artistic satisfaction out of recording?
Well, what's so beautiful about recording, I've always thought of myself as a kind of portrait painter, only I paint with sound and with music, and with image, with words and beautiful lyrics. But I've always seen the stories that I tell in songs very cinematically, like T-Bone does, actually, which I didn't really know we had that in common. But whenever I'm singing in performance or concert or cabaret, or in the musical theater, I always see this little movie running in front of my mind's eye, and I've always, it's like a series of images that I've carefully worked out, because I work on my material really, it takes me a long time to create even, it took me months to get memory right in Cats, and I kind of really learned how to work on material in the experience of learning how to sing memory, which was a huge gift in my life from Andrew Lloyd Webber and Trevor Nunn and Gillian Lynn. And that was an amazing opportunity to step into the potential that I had been working to manifest in my life for a number of years. I studied with this brilliant teacher for 19 and a half years named Paul Gavert. And he used to say, you have the capacity, your capacity to focus is really the source. He would say, beautiful work, Betty Lynn, beautiful acting, beautiful singing is about one-pointed focus. And if you can do that, you can do anything. And so I learned in the same time period to meditate. And that really taught me how to focus my mind. And my teacher used to say, one breath becomes the next breath, becomes the next breath. One note becomes the next note, becomes the next note. One vowel becomes the next vowel, becomes the next vowel. And then through meditation, I realized it's more than that. It's even one thought becomes the next thought, becomes the next thought. And the only way to do that, and he used to stress, like, I would take my songs into him and I'd be so proud of what I'd worked on, and I'd sing for him and he'd say, okay, that was nice, but we need more line, more line, more line. And it took me years to understand what he meant by line. I'd studied with him for 13 years when I finally got memory to sing. And it was like I'd been collecting all this information. I mean, I think, I understand that a lot of you are actors and singers and, so one thing I can say to you is, and I've been a teacher for over 40 years, over 41 years actually, I've been teaching, and I've met so many talented people, so many gifted people in New York and all over the country, and they're very talented, very beautiful. They have all this you think they have everything, but they don't want to work hard. They want to just kind of, if they were little stars in their high school, they want to kind of just rest on their laurels, and they go to acting classes for somebody to say, "Yes, bless you, my child, you are a star," and I never understood that, because it takes so much work to be a good singer, to be a good actor, and it takes a lifetime to grow into yourself as a human being. It's a lifetime. And somehow or another, I've been blessed with certain knowings that kind of I knew some things from the time I was a teenager. For example, I knew that my best work would be in my later years. And I was grateful to know that, and knew that if I just kept working, if I just kept studying, I would get better, and I was committed to that journey. And it's true, and it took me 13 years of studying with this guy to even begin to understand what he was talking about. And I was still working in the world, and I thought I could do some stuff. Suddenly I had this song memory just saying, and nothing I knew how to do was working. And the job assignment was stop the show. And I had no idea how to stop a show. I had stopped shows, but I didn't know there was a way to do it, it's like it kind of happened, and I was like, well, that was nice, but, if you asked me how it happened, I had no clue. I was trying so hard to please Trevor Nunn and trying so hard to please Andrew Lloyd Webber. I remember one rehearsal with Andrew Lloyd Webber, which was hilarious. It was like it went on for an hour, and he had me sing Memory over and over and over again for an hour. And then he would say, Placido Domingo was at the show last night, and he said, tell the girl to just sing the song. And I was like, I am just singing the song. What is he talking about, And then Trevor called a special 2-hour rehearsal where he told me the entire story of The Winter's Tale. And I was like, trying to cling to every word, every image he gave me. And for the life of me, to this day, I have no understanding of how The Winter's Tale applied to Grisabella and cats. Zero, I just still am absolutely clueless about that. And I've contemplated it quite a lot. And then I asked my friend James Lapine to come see it, and I called him. I said, James, can you please come see this, because it's not working, and I don't know why. I'm doing everything they said. My choreography was down to my pinky. Everything about me was choreographed, and I was singing it note by note the way I thought they wanted, and I was imagining The Winter's Tale, and it was so ridiculous. And so Lapine, we go out after the show, and he says, well, Betty, you're doing it really well. Everything's really nice, but I have no idea how you feel. And I'm like, how I feel? I feel The Winter's Tale. I feel... So then I really turned within, and, I'm a meditator, and I pray a lot and meditate a lot. And so this inner voice, this inner being, this inner child started taking me around the streets of New York City to follow homeless people. And that turned it all around, because I was like, oh, I see. And I saw women my same age, I was 35, whose eyes were just like mine. And sorry, it was just a really profoundly beautiful experience in my life. One morning, I walked out of my apartment building. I lived at West 86th and West End. And there was this woman who'd lived in our neighborhood for a number of years that I'd never paid attention to. And she had hair the color of Grisabella. I swear to God, this is the truth. She had hair the color of Grisabella's, and white pasty makeup and red lipstick that was smeared. And she floated across my path and made eye contact with me. And she wasn't pathetic in any way. And they'd been directing me. And Trevor kept saying, pathos, pathos, which was a result, but not what I should play. So that's part of what I learned. And she looked at me as if to say, I have so much I could share with you, but you don't have time, and neither do I. And then she just floated off down the street, like in slow motion. And I was like, wow, that's really extraordinary. And then 2 nights later, the universe, just in case I didn't get it the first time, sent me, because I often don't get it, So they wanted to be sure I got it. So the universe sent me another woman, quite like the first, hair the color of Grisabella's, white pasty makeup, red lipstick that was smeared. And she crossed my path and floated by me at the stage door of the Winter Garden. I swear to God, this happened exactly as I'm telling you. And I was shocked. And I couldn't believe it. I was like, and she made eye contact with me. And again, there was this tremendous sense of dignity and self-respect. And it was very profound. And it was like, I have so much I could share with you, but you don't have time, and neither do I, maybe later. And she floated off down the street. And I was like, okay, I think I got it. And so it took me about 2 weeks to incorporate all those things I was experiencing. Like one woman chased me down the street because she saw me studying her, and so I learned to, place myself at a discreet distance. And I just went through all this stuff, and they kept coming to me, trying to help me, Trevor, Andrew, and fortunately, my inner self came up with this. I said, I'm in transition. And they were like, oh, she's in transition.
"1776" is one of my all-time favorite musicals. So what got you to New York, and how did you land that role? Because you did it in one day, right?
Everybody in Fort Worth wanted me to move to New York. So I trained it in, and I called Roger. I moved into the Barbizon Hotel for Women. And I had my little dog, and I moved into the hotel. I called him. I said, well, I'm here. And he said, you have an audition in 15 minutes at the American Theater Laboratory. Take your music, jump in a cab, and go. So I went downtown to this place, and I was the last girl to audition on the last day of auditions for the role of Martha Jefferson in 1776. And they had cast another girl who was a classic soprano, and that section of the show wasn't working to their satisfaction, but they didn't know how to fix it, and they didn't know what was wrong. So they reopened auditions. And in fact, Donna McKechnie walked out right before me, and I didn't know her name, but I was like, oh, that's a New York actress. Look at her. She's so cool, And she had on this little mini skirt and these high boots and her beautiful curly hair, and I was like, wow, this is so exciting. And so I went in and I sang Rose of Washington Square, which was my Miss Fort Worth song, if you can imagine. And it was also my Six Flags Over Texas song. It was assigned to me by this showman named Charlie Meeker. And I thought, I don't like this song, And he was like, believe me, it's great. And so, sure enough, it would stop the show in the amphitheater at Six Flags Over Texas, So that became my big song. But it was a really kick-ass arrangement. That's why it stopped the show, but whatever. I sang that for them, and they were like, who are you? And I was like, I'm Betty Buckley. And they said, where are you from? And I said, Fort Worth, Texas. And they said, when did you get to town? I said, today. And they were like, today? Oh my God, it's like a movie. It's like a movie. And I still didn't know. There were about 11 of them, and they looked really important, so I didn't. And they kept me there. So I went into the waiting room, and the stage manager comes out, this guy named Peter Stern. He said, do you have any idea what you're auditioning for? And I said, no. And he said, this is a big Broadway musical. And if you get this part, you're like the luckiest little girl I've ever met. And I was like, oh, that's really cool, And so, So I went in again and I read for them, and what they liked was I could sing the song as the soprano, or I could sing it in this high belt and, whatever, and different keys, which gave them all these choices, and they liked that. And so by the next day I was in costume fittings, and I called my mother that night and I said, I think something really great's about to happen.
I'm getting my act together and taking it on the road meant a lot to you. Fans of I'm getting my act together. Because you had first met Gretchen Cryer, like you said, in 1776. That was a milestone musical. I mean, the way it was viewed here and everything else.
It was.
Yeah.
She was great, and I loved that show. And she originated the part. And then I think I was the third replacement. I was doing the TV show 8 is Enough, and this was my second or third hiatus. Maybe it was my third hiatus. I think it was, yeah. And so I came in that spring and went into the show at Circle in the Square for 2 months. And everybody in the show was really tired. They'd been doing it for a long time. And that was when I really learned how to work, how to apply the principles of meditation to my work. So when I started doing the show, I was wearing the same costume Gretchen had worn, in the high heels, the little character shoes, and trying to play it again as everybody else thought it should be played, because Gretchen had originated it. And I was meditating, and in my meditations it came to me that I shouldn't really be wearing a skirt, and that I should be wearing little flat shoes, and that I should wear a little t-shirt and then an overshirt and a jacket and a scarf that kind of gradually came off during the show, and that the last silhouette of the girl was like this little tomboy girl, and because she's so ardent on trying to get her manager to understand her feelings, and it's a real feminist musical. And I just had this real take on the part, and so I called Gretchen and I said, is that okay with you if I change some of the elements? And she was like, sure, go ahead, because they'd been doing it for a while and it didn't matter. And so I spoke to the stage manager, and he was fine, and the cast, that was fine. So I wore these pants and the little outfit, that I'd found. And that gave me more freedom to run and play on the stage during the show. And my whole performance was transformed, and these very spontaneous things started happening. So I went to the stage manager again. I went to the actors who were basically the band members and the backup singers, and then my leading man. And I said, do you mind if I try some stuff? And they were like, no, because they were bored anyway, So go ahead. We're interested to see what you're going to do, So this way of working really started. It became really good, and the audience kind of came back to the show because the buzz went out that something good was happening at the Circle in the Square. And I got called into this big casting guy's office. He was a producer for Francis Coppola, a man named Fred Roos. He's considered one of the great casting minds in film, and he's produced many of Coppola's movies, and he also produced The Black Stallion, which was one of my favorite movies ever. And he called me into his office and he said, I saw your performance in Getting My Act Together. I just want you to know that you're now one of my actors, and I'm going to be sure you work in film. And he said, and these are the actors that I've made that happen for: Frederick Forrest, Terry Garr, blah, blah, blah. And then he was trying to get me together on a Coppola project, but I was working at that point again in 8 is Enough, so that didn't happen. But towards the end of that season on 8 is Enough, he sent me a script called Tender Mercies by Horton Foote, and he called me and he said, thank you. He called me and he said, they're looking for an actress who can really act, who can sing country western. And he said, I gave them one name. Go get the part. And I was like, oh my God, and it was starring Robert Duvall, and he was one of the producers as well. So I went in and I met Bruce Beresford, and I'd seen Breaker Morant just right before that, and his film, and I was like, thought it was so beautiful. And so I sat down with him. It was the easiest meeting I've ever had in the whole of my career. He said, you come highly recommended. And I said, thank you. And he said, can you act? And I said, yes. And he said, can you sing? I said, yes. He said, can you sing country western? And I said, yes, I'm from Texas. He said, do you want this job? And I said, yes. And that was it. And
Wow. Any Carrie fans here? Well, first, with Carrie was Brian De Palma. You worked with him on the film. What was he like working as a director and playing that role in the film?
Well, I had auditioned for him for a film of his called Phantom of the Paradise. and he didn't cast me. But after he made the movie, he brought me in to loop the voices for a bunch of teenage girls and a couple of older people in the film, because he'd taken an interest in me. He came to see me in Pippin, and he visited my acting class as well. And so we became friends. And so then I started looping movies for him. And I had a skill for that. I'm not very good at looping myself, but I'm good at looping other people. And before the days of the supermodel, they would hire me to come in, and they'd say, okay, this girl's 22 years old, and this is her lifestyle, create a voice for her. And so I did voices for supermodels a lot. And so, I did that. And so I was good at looping. And he would cast in a couple of his movies. I did 3 movies for him in that way. He would cast these local people on location who weren't really actors, and then he would bring me in to do their voices. And that would create a semblance of a performance from them, which I thought was interesting, that just in the sound of the voice you can convey truth or whatever. And so that was really fun to do and to work for him, because he was this hot director. And then he said, one day I got that any one of these parts would be a great debut for a kid like me, that was studying acting so hard. And, I'd been in Pippin forever, and to pay for my acting classes and my therapy. And so anyway, I finally said to him after the 3rd movie, I said, you know what, Brian, I'm not going to do this for you anymore because this is wrong. I said, there's all these actors in New York who would die to have any one of these parts, and you're going out on location to save money casting people who aren't even actors, and that's not fair to all of us who are committed to learning how to do this better, And so he... He kind of thought about that, and then a few months later, he called me, and he asked me to go to dinner. So I went to dinner, and he gave me the novel of Carrie, and he said, this is going to be my next movie, and I want you to play the gym teacher. And I was like, cool, that's really nice. So I went home, and I read the book, and the gym teacher's part was like baby. And I thought, that's still really nice, And then a few months later, he sent me the script, and he had combined the role of the principal and the gym teacher into what was a beautiful film debut in the part of Miss Collins. She was Miss Desjardins in the book, and then became Miss Collins. And I couldn't believe it. Again, it was a huge gift.
And then tackling the musical.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. I see there's a story there.
Yeah. When they wrote it, Dean Pitchford, Michael Gore, Larry Cohen had written the screenplay of the film Carrie, and they were all my friends. And Dean called me and said, "We've written the musical of Carrie, and we want." And I was like, "Why?" And they said, "No, you don't get it. It's going to be great." And I said, "Really?" And he was like, "No, yeah, it'll be great, and we want you to play Margaret." And I was like, "Well, cool, And so we started negotiating, and I met Terry Hands. And Terry Hands was the head of the RSC at that point. And he and I didn't connect at that meeting. And I had my doubts about the show anyway. And so and I had a big power broker agent at that point, and we started negotiating really strongly. And 3 months into the negotiation, we both agreed it wasn't going to work out. So they went on to Barbara Cook, and then they went to the RSC production. And they got the worst reviews in history. And Barbara Cook decided she wasn't coming in to Broadway. She didn't want to continue with the show. And so they called me again and wanted to fly me to London, and that didn't work out because I was busy. I think I was shooting Frantic, actually. And so couldn't happen. And so they sent me a video, and I thought she sang it beautifully. I mean, she's impeccable, of course. She's one of the great singers in the world. And but I watched it, and I thought maybe I could bring something to it. And so we started negotiating again, and we were still negotiating, wasn't coming together. And finally, my agent called and said, "Look, if you don't go in," he says, "what I've gotten for you is a guarantee if it closes." And I said, "Well, that sounds good. That'll be good. At least it's worth the risk, And so he said, "If you don't go in, all these people will be out of work." And I said, "You're right." And so I went in. And Lindsay Haley was fantastic. Yeah. And she was 17, and this was her first Broadway show. It was so provocative, though. People had huge responses to it. You know, some people really loved what we were doing, and some people didn't love it at all. When the song died, very silent, the tune that filled my days no longer plays. The room is still, and there are long silence, and the song dies. Was I so foolish to think I could pray when there's only one chance I can save you? I gave you life, I can take it away. Let the shadows descend like a knife. But when I am all alone, will I cry, Carrie? Oh, my Carrie. Anyway, I had to go up in this elevator to the top of the Aztec staircase to come down singing this lullaby to Carrie, you know, who's been, you know, doused with blood, you know, at the prom and stuff. And so I'm singing this lullaby, and behind my back I have this huge butcher knife, and so I'm like comforting her, and I take her in my arms, and we're, you know, at the middle section of the Aztec stairs, and I'm comforting her and singing, and then I stab her in the back, and then she stops my heart, crawls down another few steps, sings a few notes, and then, you know, after I die, she dies. And then we were choreographed to, in the dark, you know, then it's a blackout, and then as the lights came up, we were to stand and take a bow and then run off for the official bows to start. So first performance. She goes out for her first number, and she stops the show cold. 17 years old, Broadway debut, stops the show cold. You know, it's backstage, and I was like, oh, that's so great. And then it was my first number, and I stopped the show, and it's like amazing, and the audience is going nuts the whole show, you know. And like as I get to the top of the stairs, somebody yells, "Betty Buckley, come on down!" And it was like crazy. I mean, people were crazy. The energy in the audience was nuts. I mean, just like just crazy. People had such a response to that material, and so I stab her. She kills me. She crawls down. She dies, and in the dark, the entire audience, as the lights go out, start to boo en masse. And never in my life have I experienced anything like that. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, they are booing. And I thought, oh, this is like a theatrical riot. And I remember, I literally was on stage in the dark thinking of my survey of theater course my freshman year in college, where they said, you know, some of the Ibsen's early work created theatrical riots, you know, and some of the Jacobean dramas created theatrical riots, which was exactly what Terry Hands wanted to happen, you know. And I thought, oh my God, I'm in the middle of a theatrical riot. This is so exciting. And I was like, so they're booing en masse. Now, poor little Lindsay, 17, has just opened in her first Broadway show, has just stopped the show with every song she's sung. She turns to me in the dark. I'm her coach. I'm her mentor. She trusts me. And she turns around, and she's closer to the booing masses than I am, right? And so she's terrified. And she turns around to me in the dark. She goes, what do I do? And I go, stand up, because we have to get out of here. And so... So we stand up as the lights come up, and immediately the booing goes to full house standing ovation in a split second. That's how schizophrenic it was. And we went off stage and we were like, what just happened? You know, it was like that every performance. It was crazy.
My final question for you is, what is the best bit of advice that you've been given that you live by?
I think I pretty much said it earlier. For those of you that are actors and singers, you have to love this craft, the craft of singing, the craft of acting, the craft of storytelling, more than anything, and you have to commit yourself to learn more and more and more and more about that. And as long as your life path is about study and getting better, I think it's really important to watch artists that you really admire. Like, this is what I've done, watch the actors and actresses that you really admire who do a quality of work that you are touched by, whatever that is. And singers and dancers and choreographers, artists, great artists, study them. And then find out how they learned to do that. That's what I did. Whenever I really loved someone, I would say, where do you study? And fortunately was generously guided to the right people. Because not every teacher in this city or elsewhere has a clue about what they're doing. And honestly, they don't. And I've been very fortunate to avoid some of these kinds of charlatan teachers. And there are some really excellent teachers in New York and excellent studios. And then study and make that your joy. The craft is your joy. Because show business is very cyclical. And one day they love you and the next day they won't take your calls. It doesn't matter what you accomplish. That continues on. And the other thing that I think is really important is to be very interested in your own maturing and aging process. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. And our culture is so terrified of maturity and aging, and we worship youth, and we think anything short of that is somehow, there's something wrong with it. And I know for sure that there isn't anything wrong with this aging process. There's, thank you. There's tremendous grace and the possibility of enormous wisdom. And if it weren't for the faults of the confusion of our culture, we could be so much easier on ourselves. I think that's very important. And I think in the world of show business, where you will always, according to the world of opinion, be too young, too old, too fat, too thin, too pretty, not pretty enough. There'll always be something off if you are interested in that world or if you listen to it. And it's very hard not to listen to it. It's very hard to keep your own counsel. For me, meditation and prayer and brilliant psychologists have very much helped me, and I highly recommend all of that for aspiring or, actors, singers, storytellers. I recommend that for everybody because I think we live in a culture that is very confused about most everything. And so within that, again, then you can find a real sacred honor in being a storyteller, because we need storytellers that tell us the truth about humanity and the world around us. I've always thought of myself, and I tell my students, we're undercover artists, right? It's like in the story you're telling, it seems to be about this show, it seems to be about this song or this body of songs. It's not. It's about making people remember who they really are. That's the mission, and making other human beings feel good about who they really are, despite all this craziness. And if you can do that, then your life can just keep going, and you can feel a real sense of worth, and that you're sharing something that's important because it is. So,
thank you. I have done this for a long time, and I have to say that this afternoon, thank you for being so honest, so emotional. This was absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. It's been a pleasure.
Miss Betty Buckley.